So beautiful and sexy. Now I'm flying like an airplane. Now I'm riding on an open range. Now I'm living out my destiny. Know the truth, I got it all in you and me. Giving myself over to you. Body and soul, I'm giving it all. I'm giving myself over to you now. Like a brand new day. Like you and I with a face to face. Ain't nobody got nothing to say, no. And from my feelings, I never have to run away no more. 'Cause he's here, holding me tight, every day and night. Oh, man, can't you see? I don't wanna be without you anymore. Oh, I'm giving myself over to you. Body and soul, I'm giving it over. I'm giving myself over to you. I'm giving myself over to you. Body and soul, I'm giving it over.
Thanks. All right, if you would come on in and find your seats. I appreciate everybody enjoying the fellowship.
George was great.
Good. Hey, George, you passed. Yeah. Now, if we're going to ask Trevor to come back and share some more from his heart, and we'll go till just at 5 o'clock, about 5 till. So Trevor can see the watch clock back there. And then at 5 o'clock, we'll have dinner and our panel discussion and wrap it up at that time. They are on the way back with dinner, so in about a few minutes, there will be some people setting it out at these tables back there. So that will be a real challenge for Trevor to hold our attention while people are setting up dinner behind us. So we'll just see if he's up to the task. So, now Trevor and I were just visiting. I was sharing with somebody that I had Trevor and his wife and daughter at my house, wife and son at my house. I'm sorry, I did remember it was a son. And Trevor said, yeah, we had fajitas. And Ben, he was talking to, has fajitas at my house too. And they both decided that the most memorable part of being at my house was fajitas. I'm like, yeah, doesn't remember a thing we talked about, but he remembers the fajitas. So hopefully, Trevor, people will remember more about what you said than dinner. Yeah.
All right, am I on? All right. So how were the breakout sessions? Good, very good, very good. Well, in light of the conversations that we had earlier, here's one of the more practical issues that we have to deal with, and that is conflict in a marriage relationship. This is going to be a whole lot more practical, but I don't want us to move too far from our understanding of how the gospel impacts our relationships, even within a quarrel or within a conflict. So I want to show you what I think is a necessary understanding of the conflict or the quarrels that you may have. Excuse me. It is more important that you understand the nature of the conflict than you avoid or find your way through the conflict. Knowing why you fight is more important than that you fight. I had a friend when I was in undergraduate school. We thought he was the strangest guy because he got married before he graduated from undergraduate school. We thought we were just too young to get married. But he got married while we were still in undergraduate school. And he and his wife had the biggest fight. He came back to, me and another guy were rooming together, and he came to our room, George, and just to sort of get away from the heated conflict. And we asked him, so what were you guys fighting about? They had the biggest fight over whether or not you should put bread in the refrigerator or not. He said he doesn't like the bread in the refrigerator because he doesn't like a cold sandwich. The wife said you have to put the bread in the refrigerator because the bread keeps longer. And then he said, well, no, I'm not sure that it does because it gets harder in the refrigerator than if it's left. They had the biggest fight about bread in the refrigerator. Now, let me ask you guys a question. Who was right? All the husbands are afraid to answer. Who was right? Brett, who's right?
Buy 2 loaves and everybody wins.
That is a way to fix it. Buy 2 loaves, one in the refrigerator and one on the counter. But let me ask you a question. Why did they fight? Because it was a real fight to them. And whether you know it or not, you guys have fights all the time too, over some of the smallest things. Yes, sir, I'm sorry, I missed it. Control. Now, how many of y'all think control was the issue? Who's trying to control who? They're both trying to control each other. That's a good answer. I don't think it's right, but it's a good answer. Any other ideas? Why are they fighting? Yes, ma'am.
It was just a compilation of things, and the bread just happened to be the straw that broke the camel's back.
I've heard that before, but you know what? Tell me your name. I'm sorry. Lisa, I've heard that before, but you know what I've come to say? I think it was really about bread. I think it was really just about bread. But I want you to consider your own issues, your own fights. It may have been something else, right? It may not have been bread, but it was something else, and you guys had a fight. What was it about? Yes, ma'am. Pride. I think it's in there. I think it's in there, but I don't think it's the source.
I got an idea.
You got an idea. Let me get to the guy in the back because his hand went up before you. Be careful. Your wife is sitting right next to you. Just be careful. Okay.
I think it was just the change, difference. Something was changing within, if it's early on in the morning. It seemed to be, if they're arguing about bread, it was a change.
So, because people don't like change, we fight. That's a good answer. I don't think it's right. That's a good answer, though, but because we don't like change. Yes, sir.
I think it's the strong convictions of this is the way I've always done it, and I don't want to change it. This is the way it's supposed to be done because I grew up doing it like this.
Mm-hmm. I think that has a whole lot to do with it, right? It is, we have, what's the word? We have made a preference something, a matter of right and wrong, right? That's not how you do it, and it's not simply that it's not a preference. That's a good answer, but I don't think it's right. Yes, ma'am. Lack of compromise. That's also a very good answer. But I don't think it's right. Yes, sir. You got it.
Maybe they both want to be right. They both think they're right, and being right is most important for them.
You know, I would tend to agree with you if God hadn't said something different. If he hadn't said something different. Are y'all sufficiently stumped? Yes, ma'am.
What about their personal desire?
You've been reading ahead, haven't you? She said their personal desire. Watch this. I think, well, not I think. That's a bad way of starting. The Bible teaches that it's as simple as their desires. It's at the source. When we look at this passage in James chapter 4, I want you to notice that James does not deal with the surrounding issues that could come as a result of the source. He goes right for the source of the conflict. Now, his subject is conflict and quarrels. He says, among you. Just so that you know I'm using this correctly, he's writing to a community of believers, and there's conflicts and there's quarrels in the community. And so if there's conflicts and quarrels in your home or in your marriage, it applies because you are believers and you have a Christian home, and the quarrels that begin at the home, they affect the body just as much as two members of the body in a conflict. Am I right? And so James goes right for not the symptoms, but the source of the quarrel. That he does suggests that it's important for you to know why you're fighting and not simply have tools on how to fight. You know, I went to one Christian marriage conference, and Dexter and I talked about this kind of thing. And some Christian marriage conferences can be very worldly in their approach. They gave us tools for how to fight fairly. Y'all ever had those things before? Watch this. The Bible doesn't give you tools for how to fight fairly. It tells you what's the source of your fighting. Now deal with the source and stop fighting. That's what it does. Now, if you can't stop fighting, maybe tools will help you if you want to fight fair. But I would rather get to the source of the problem. I'm looking at James chapter 4, and we're going to see what James has to say about our quarrels and our conflicts. James chapter 4, beginning at verse number 1. James asks the question, what is the source of, and he uses two words that are very similar, that are very close together, but he's communicating that this is I'm trying to cover as much ground as I can. It can be a simple quarrel, it can be a conflict. The words that are actually translated there are military terms. They mean war and battle. For what do you take sides and go to battle for as believers? Because the reality is that's what our fights look like, right? We square off against each other as if we are enemies at war. It's not like two people who love each other. When it gets right down to it, bread will put you on opposite sides of the fence, and you will go to war over whether or not you have a cold sandwich or not. You know, when I explain it that way, it sounds kind of silly, doesn't it? But we do it. We fight over it, don't we? And we go to war. We say things that injure each other, sometimes intentionally. We want to hurt each other with the things that we say because at that moment we are on opposite sides of the fence and we are enemies. And James says, so what's the source? What makes y'all go to battle, take sides? And he answers the question with a rhetorical question. He says, is it not? He wants you to agree with him. He says, think about it. Is not the source your pleasures? Now, what does he mean by pleasures? So it's an odd choice of words, isn't it? He says, is not the source your pleasures? Think about the word for a moment. What does he mean by pleasures? Come on, somebody help me. Let me know you're out there with me. What does he mean by pleasures? Your desires. I think the word communicates more than that because he could have said, is not the source your desires. But he chooses a word that's a little more ambiguous in most people's thinking. He chooses what the the translators translate as pleasures. It's actually the word hedone, where we get the word hedonism from. So what does that mean? He says your problem is not bread, it's your pleasures. What does that mean? By the way, what is hedonism? Anybody know what hedonism is? When my wife and I, we were young once. It's hard to believe, but we were young once. And we went on a vacation to Jamaica. And we were at an all-inclusive resort. And it was the one we were in was a family resort. And we were right next to one that was called hedonism. We were right next to a resort that was called hedonism, right? And we knew enough, read about hedonism to know that was not the one for us. But they were close enough for us to get a sense of hedonism, if you know what I mean. And watch this. And James uses a word that has the same sense as what was going on at Club Hedonism. You got a picture yet? It is, I want something that I know excites me, but somehow it's just outside of my moral boundaries, but because I want it, I go for it anyway. Hedonism. Your desires on hyperdrive. It's what I want because I want what I want when I want it. It's akin to, who was it said pride? Who was it gave me the pride? Say it again. Yeah, it's egotistical about what you want. It is, I'm going to get what I want because I want it. I have to fulfill this desire to get what I want. And the writer translates it as your pleasures. He's going to also call it your lusts. You know, lust is not just something that's sexual. You know, men lust after certain cars, don't we? By the way, that's another source of quarrels and conflicts in marriage, isn't it? You know, wife wants a minivan because she's practical, and husband wants a red sports car because he's hedonistic. I'm kidding. Sometimes the minivan can be hedonistic too. Are y'all with me? No, artist, you can't get that red sports car. Stop trying. But you get my point, right? And he says the source of your conflicts and your quarrels, your battles, is what you want that you are willing to fight for. And watch this, if you fight for it, it's clear you want it so badly, you will fight for it. Now, here is the question. Why would you want a warm sandwich so bad that you would fight your wife for it? But yeah, you're right, it does. It tastes better than a cold sandwich. But watch this. I get it. Watch this. Listen to me. Listen to me. I want you to consider what's gone wrong on the inside of you that you would want a warm sandwich so bad that you would fight for it. Something's broken, isn't it? Something's not right on the inside. That you would say mean things, get into this fight. What happened to, well, it's just a sandwich. Why didn't that come up first? Where you say, it's not worth the fight. Why was cold bread worth a fight? You know why? Because whenever we want, what we want enslaves us. Whatever the Bible says, whatever you give your members to enslaves you. And the only thing that you should be enslaved to is the Lord. He's a good master. As a matter of fact, the writer is going to say later, then submit yourselves to God. You know why? Because we give ourselves to all of those things that we want, and eventually the things that we want, they will enslave us, and we'll fight for them. And he says the source of why you fight is your pleasures. You want some things. Listen, our desires can be so corrupt because they come from a corrupt heart that they will corrupt everything around us. And you've got to understand that not everything you want, even if it's as simple as a warm sandwich, is a noble desire. Your desires has to be filtered through the lenses of the gospel and what God would have you do, or what God would want for you. Anything that gets elevated above your desire for God leads to sin and to quarrels and to conflict. And watch this, and it has nothing to do with your spouse. How do I know that? It has nothing to do with your spouse. Listen to what James says. Is not the source of your pleasures that wage war where? Where does it wage war? In your members. Right, in you. It's not about your spouse. Listen, who cares whether the bread is in the refrigerator or not? It really does not matter. But the fight to get what you want is in your members. Because something has gone wrong in you that you would want warm bread so badly that you would fight for it. And the reason he's telling you is, listen, when that desire comes up, you need to check your desires. If you feel that rage coming up, that war rising in your members, the reason he tells you is so that you can say, okay, something's going wrong on the inside of me. I'm about to say something unkind. I'm about to fight for something that I really should not fight for. And then our human reasoning comes in and you say, well, it's okay for me to want that. I deserve that. Husbands say, well, I deserve it. I worked hard all day. Wives say, well, I've done all of these things for the kids. I've raised the kids. A little me time, I deserve that. I've earned that. Listen, here's a classic fight. Classic fight. Now, y'all excuse me, the example just fits better if we have the traditional home setting. So I don't mean any harm by it. So husband's at work, right? He's at work and he's working hard, right? He's having to deal with all kinds of issues and those things. Now, it could very easily be flipped. The wife could be at work, but y'all understand where I'm going, right? And so the husband, he's thinking about what his evening is going to be like when he gets home and he can leave the chaos of work. Familiar, fellas? Right? He sees it. He envisions it, right? I'm gonna come home, right? I'm gonna sit on the couch. I'm gonna open my favorite beverage, right? I was gonna say the VCR, but I'm showing my age. What's the thing that records shows now? DVR. DVR has already taped what I want to watch, and I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna put it on and I'm gonna relax as soon as I get home, right? And the moment he walks through the door, wife says, I'm so glad you're home because I need you to, and she's got a list. Because wife has been envisioning all day what she wants when you get home. When he gets home, I'm going to hand these kids right off to him because I've been with them all day. They are driving me crazy. And the moment he gets home, I'm going to have a moment of peace. I'm going to give it a little me time. I'm going to run me a bath, right? I'm going to put a candle in there and put some jazz music on, and I'm going to get away. Calgon moment. And she's been dreaming of it all day, and she wants it. But watch this. When husband gets home, there's a clash of pleasures, isn't it? You can't get what you want because y'all want different things. So who's at fault that you can't get your bath? Who's at fault because you don't get to watch the show you DVR'd? Who's at fault? The devil's at fault. He's a lie. I'm going to watch TV. But watch this. At that moment, the fight gets really tense. The home gets tense. You really want it. Listen, if husband gives in, he's angry, he's resentful, sharp, sarcastic. If husband comes home and puts his feet up and wife really thought, I'm going to get my moment, she watches him with those eyes that says, how dare he sit down when I've been on my feet all day? Familiar, isn't it? Now watch this. And before you say anything, the war has already begun in your members. You'll feel it, won't you? If I say something, I know where this is going. Should I say something or should I not? in your members. And watch this. And then the ungodly reasoning of humanity, the way the world thinks, starts to creep into your thoughts. I deserve some time alone. I work hard for what I do. My family should appreciate my sacrifice, and I deserve some time to myself. And I want y'all to realize something. Both of you may be right. Both of you may be right. But the problem is you can't both get what you want. And you still don't have a problem until you determine, I will fight for what I want. It's what you want that leads to your fight. And you've got to identify it if you're going to have any chance at not having this conflict occur over and over and over again. So here is what, listen to what James says. So you need a solution then, right? Listen to this. He says, verse 2, you lust and you do not have. That's just a picture of the tension. I want it, I'm lusting for it, but I can't have it. And you can feel the tension rising in your members. The war is there. And it says, so you commit. Y'all see the word he chooses? Now, wait a minute. It's not realistic that members of the community that he's writing to are actually committing murder, right? That's not, we're not to take that literally, right? What's he saying? Not just the tongue, but that's the power of your desires. It will drive you to go to war and maybe even commit murder. You ever watch it on TV? And I see it all the time. And I'll watch sometimes with my mother, and she'll say, this world has gone crazy. Husband comes home, they have a big old fight, and then husband shoots wife, shoots kids, and then shoots himself. Why? It's inexplicable, isn't it? Inexplicable, not unexplicable. Inexplicable. It's inexplicable, right? There's an easy answer for it. He wanted what he wanted so bad that he was willing to commit murder for it. And here's what y'all need to understand. You are not above it either. Fights get out of control, and the more you fight, the more you want what you're fighting for. You have more to lose now. You don't want to have had a 30-minute fight and not win, not get what you want. And so it escalates and it escalates, and then the same root that causes someone to commit murder is right there in your house. It's right in your home. But you need a solution. So listen to what he says. You are envious and you cannot obtain. Y'all see the emphasis on the fight is there because you can't get what you want. Now watch this. If your husband comes home and he says to you, and I know you've been on your feet all day. You know what? I'm going to take the kids out for ice cream. You just have, the whole house is yours. Do whatever you like. Take your warm bath. As a matter of fact, I'll run you a warm bath just before I leave. No fight. But when you can't get what you want, you will fight. You're envious and you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You see the so there? It's when you can't get what you want that you fight. If you get what you want, you have no fight. Now, in most homes, here's what happens in most homes. It's very unfortunate. In most homes, there is one person who will go further than the other in a fight, and the person who knows they're not going to go that far usually gives in, and then one person gets whatever they want because they know they just can't fight like the other one fights. Am I right? There's one person who gives in because they know they cannot fight with the other. That's so unfortunate. It's so unfortunate. And so what we think is, if I give in, there's no fight. But then we think, then there's still no source, there's no problem. But there is. Resentment is setting in. So watch what happens. So you fight, and you quarrel, and then here is the fix. He says, you do not have because you do not ask. The implications, who would you ask? It's pretty clear, isn't it? You don't have it because you didn't ask God for it. You see it? Husbands, while you're at work dreaming of this time you're going to get at home, when did you stop to ask God for that kind of time at home? You know, you may have whispered that unspoken prayer, Lord, I sure hope I get to sit down when I get home. Not quite the same. Right? That's wishful thinking with God's name included. It's not exactly the same. He says, but you don't have it because you don't ask for it. Wives, you hear it? You never stop to ask for it, he says. But some of you are thinking, but I have asked for it and I still don't get it. But listen, the answer is to ask. Ask God for what you want. He should be the source of where you take your desires to. If you want something, ask for it. And then you have a litmus test. James is going to tell you, you have a litmus test. Ask God, is he able to give it to you? Come on, say something. Yes. He is able, isn't he? Right? Is your husband so big a scoundrel that if you ask God for a night out, your husband will just say no? He said, hopefully not. I don't think there's not one husband who is so big a scoundrel that God can't say yes and he say no. Just don't think it happens. I think God's bigger than every scoundrel husband out there. God wants you to have a night to yourself. God can flip your scoundrel of a husband. I believe that. But watch this. But what happens when you ask and you don't get it? My brother says, then you don't need it. Listen to what James says. You ask and do not receive. Because you ask, James says, with... Y'all see what it says? No, that was all on you. Now, if you trust God, and I believe you do, now that you know, ask. And if your husband comes home and kicks off his shoes and he sits down, what do you conclude? He is insensitive. That's what you conclude, right? Y'all missed it. He's a scoundrel. Exactly. You've prayed about it. You've asked God, God, I really need an hour and a half, 2 hours when my husband gets home to just get my thoughts together. Please, I need that, Father. And when your husband gets home, you tell him, you communicate. You say, I've had a rough day with the kids today. I need about an hour and a half, 2 hours. If he gives it to you, what do you conclude? God answered your prayer. If he does not give it to you, what do you conclude? He's a scoundrel. What should you conclude? It's a better answer. What should you conclude? Y'all are hesitant to say, I know that's a tough one to swallow. Go ahead, swallow it. It's good for you. It's like medicine. Take it. Yeah, and who is deciding? Who's deciding? God's deciding, isn't he? He's deciding, isn't he? And he says to you very clearly, if you don't get what you want, it's because you have asked with wrong motives. And he says, so that you may spend it on your pleasures, on your hedonism. It's not that you need it, you just want it. It's not that you need it, you're thinking about yourself too much. Listen, and he says, don't let anybody fool you, right? You can't then say, well, I deserve this. If God says no, it's about your motives. You don't deserve it. It's about your pleasures. And that's the war that's waging inside of you. Because here's what will happen until you start to really I would say practice, that's the wrong word, until you start to wrestle with where your fight really is and then decide to trust God, what will happen invariably is that you're going to fight with your spouse anyway for it. And here's what my hope is. When the fight's done, because you have determined I'm going to fight for what I want because I want what I want, that this passage will come back to you. When y'all are settling down and you're thinking, okay, what just happened here? Was that really about bread? Your thoughts will come back to you and James will return to you and you'll say, you know why I was fighting? Because I just wanted what I wanted. And then your whole disposition, watch this, your whole disposition to your spouse should change, because when you realize and you trust God, it wasn't about them at all. It was about you. And God has told you in His Word, the reason I didn't give you what you wanted was because your motives were bad. Your motives were bad. And that's at the source of your conflict. Listen to what he finishes with. He says, now watch this. I've always struggled with the book of James because it always seemed to me that James has strung together a whole bunch of different subjects and there never seemed to be any continuity. But between verse 3 and verse 4, look at where James goes. He says, you adulteress. Wait a minute, where does that fit into our discussion about why we fight? It is. It's about pleasures, isn't it? But he's talking to you, the reader. He says, you adulteress. In what sense, then, if they fight, is the reader an adulteress? Who are they cheating on? You say it again. Versus what? Or versus who? Yes, exactly. And he calls you then an adulteress. Y'all see it? He says, you want what you want so bad, it's as if you have cast aside your husband, which is God, for your mistress, which is what you want. He says, you become an adulteress. You see how God takes it? He takes your fights just that seriously. He says, because you don't trust me and you want what you want so bad, you have become an adulteress. And he says, don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? Y'all see how serious the fight is with you? Watch this. One of the main reasons, I see your mail. One of the main reasons why this is so important is because it's about the truth of the gospel. When Christians fight, it's a reflection on our God. Because our God has done something in Jesus Christ to then repair the damaged relationship that we have with Him and with each other. Let me say that again. When you fight, you give God a bad name. And y'all need to know that. But Christians fight. Yeah, they're not supposed to. Jesus says, the world will know you are my disciples by the love you have for each other. And so when you fight, God calls you an adulteress. He said, what you wanted so bad that I didn't even matter anymore. You went chasing after what you wanted. Your mistress. They replaced me. I don't want you to fight, but I also don't want you to have bad motives, so I don't give you what you want. And because I don't, you go out and you find it all on your own. So what's the answer? What's the answer? What's the solution? Pray first. Ask for what you want. What's the second thing? Because that's not enough. That's close. But if you mean believe God when He says yes or no, then I'm with you. Trust. The second answer is trust. Ask and then trust. If you get it, no fight. If you don't get it, believe God, trust him. Then he believes I don't need it. He says I'm strong enough to keep going. He believes in me. No, that's a bad way of saying it. He believes that my motives are bad, and therefore I don't need it. Now here's the bigger question. Can you trust God then to not fight for what you want and ask for what you want? Because at the source of your fights, every fight, James says it as if, he says it, what's the word? He says it absolutely, as if that can be applied to any fight you're having. As if any fight or quarrel, there's not one fight or quarrel that's outside, James suggests, of his source for the fight. It's your pleasures. By the way, y'all know that's why nations go to war. You know, they'll tell people it's about principles, but it's not. One nation wants something, usually land or resources. And it's the same in our homes. But our homes represent the Christ. Our homes are supposed to be the light that you don't put under a bushel. It's supposed to be the light that shines. Our marriages is supposed to be the salt of the earth. And so listen, if you can't, if you don't just do it for your spouse, do it because you trust God. Listen, my wife's not here, so I can say this. Artist, you should have seen the look on your wife's face. Yeah, don't nobody tell her either. All the ladies saying, don't count on it. But watch this. It's easy for me to look at my wife, who keeps me from getting what I want sometimes, and develop an easy hostility towards her. Y'all know what I mean, right? I can say she's always in the way of me not getting what I want. But would I be honest with myself? Is that honesty? It's not honest, is it? The reality is it's not about her. It's about God. But watch this. But God has my relationship with her also in mind when he says to me, yes, you can have it, or no, your motives are bad. Because usually my motives, when it comes to the things I want to get that my wife's in the way with, has everything to do with my wife. And here's one thing, brothers, I know for a fact God will ask of you. If two people want what they want and one of them can't get it, who should be the one to sacrifice? Sister coughed at the question. That's her way of getting your attention, brother. She knows where I'm going. Come on, the brothers are not saying anything.
The one that needed the least.
One that needs it the least. Exactly. Sacrifice. We set the example. Our role is to sacrifice, just like Christ. Ladies, y'all notice how quiet they are now? Our role is to sacrifice the way Christ did. He said he gave himself up for her. And we're talking about life. He not just gave up the remote, he gave up life. And I bring it up because you know why? Men will say this all the time. Listen, I will give up my whole life for my wife. If an intruder comes in the house, I'm going to step between my wife and the intruder. I'll take the bullet for her. But I will not give up Monday Night Football. And listen, y'all are not fighting about the intruder. You're fighting about Monday Night Football. I used to love it, artists. I used to watch football starting Saturday morning at 11 o'clock till Sunday morning after 9, and then again Monday night, and then I got married. Wife had something to do, Cindy. As soon as the best game of the weekend came on, she had something for me to do. What should I do? I know a whole lot of men who fight about it. And I did for a while, Miosha, then I gave up fighting. So I don't watch anymore. She's laughing at me. That's terrible. So I don't watch anymore. And listen, it wasn't that my wife guilted me into it. I read James 4. James says, listen, you're lusting after that football game. You're going to say some ugly things to your wife about a football game. He told me over and over again, that's you. No, that's you. But Lord, I've been watching football all my life. Yeah, but I'm bigger than that in your life now. Put me first, he said. And so I did. I put him first. I listened to him, and then I responded to the things my wife wanted from me on those days when the best football game came on. And now I don't have any resentment for her because it's not her who is making me give it up. It's my God, and I love him for it. And so then we don't fight about it on Sunday. You'll get my point? Well, it's not my point. It's James's point. Know where the source is. It's in you first. Like my mother told me, it takes two to fight. If one of you decides not to, no fight. All it takes is one. Amen? Amen. I'm done.
Thank you, Trevor. Back and forth. Steve, did we live stream this? So you don't have to tell Trevor's wife what he said. You just have to send her the link to our YouTube channel, and she can see it for herself. Now we will distribute that to your church pastors. All of the sessions that were recorded in here and a couple of the sessions upstairs were live streamed. So if you know somebody that would benefit from this, they can watch it on YouTube. Or if you would like something in here that was said that you would like to listen to again, all of those will be available on YouTube. Now, our guys are getting our food ready. All of the food is in the back. It is baked potatoes with all of the stuffing. The drinks are still over there. Before we do that, you that led breakout sessions. Would you, breakout session leaders, stand up? These guys did this voluntary and have spent months working on these things. And Trevor, could we give them a hand and say thank you, please? And I hopped in each one of them for just a few minutes, except for the ladies. And the ladies on the Song of Solomon, both Steve and I were trying to get pictures of the workshops, and we didn't get any of the ladies on the Song of Solomon because we were both afraid to put our heads in there. So it's probably a wise part for us. But anyway, do appreciate it. Yes. Oh, the video's just 1 second. Okay. I'm going to pray for our dinner. And actually, Steve, we wanted to wait the video until everybody had gone ahead and gone through the food line. So thank you, Steve. So I'm going to pray, and as soon as they get it set up, we'll eat. And then we're going to have a video right at the beginning, and then I will turn it over to Bob Stevens, and he is going to moderate a panel discussion. The folks that are on the panel, and I don't remember, there's 5 of us: Kirk, me, Trevor, George, Tina? All right. I wasn't sure. I don't think I've even met everybody.